right, folks, buckle up, because today we're diving into a topic that might make you giggle a little bit.
Oh, I think giggle might be an understatement for this one.
True, true. Let's just say it's a topic that's usually whispered about more than shouted from the rooftops.
Definitely whispered, and often surrounded by more myths than a Greek epic.
Exactly. We're talking about squirting.
Ah, yes, squirting, the elusive, the mysterious.
And let's be honest, a topic that probably has a lot of us scratching our heads, wondering what's real and what's just, well, Hollywood magic.
Oh, Hollywood definitely has its own interpretation of squirting, let's say.
We'll get to that later, but first we've got some serious myth-busting to do.
Absolutely. Let's separate the fact from the fiction, the science from the speculation.
We've got two great sources to guide us today.
Always good to have some solid evidence to back us up.
Articles from Medical News Today and Body Harmony Physical Therapy.
Excellent sources.
So get ready for some surprising insights, because what we think we know about squirting might not be the whole story.
Oh, I think you're right about that.
First things first, let's define what we're actually talking about here.
Always a good place to start.
When we say squirting, we're talking about the release of fluid from the vagina during sexual arousal or orgasm.
Sometimes also referred to as female ejaculation.
Right, and this is where things get a bit, well, messy.
You could say that.
Because there's actually a lot of debate in the scientific community about what this fluid really is.
It's more complex than you might think.
Some researchers believe it's primarily urine, potentially mixed with fluids from these glands near the urethra called the Skene's glands.
Makes sense. They are close by after all.
But others propose it's a distinct fluid entirely.
Possibly even containing prostate-specific antigen, or PSA.
Wait, PSA, like what they test for in men's prostate exams?
You got it.
So are you telling me women have prostates too?
Now that's where the research gets really interesting.
This is my shocked face.
Some scientists believe there's a female prostate, or at least a structure similar to it, that could be contributing to this fluid.
Wow, okay, so maybe it's just pee isn't the whole story?
Definitely not the whole story. There's much more to unpack here.
This is already blowing my mind, and we're just getting started.
Buckle up. We're going deep on this one.
Okay, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the G-spot.
Ah, yes, the infamous G-spot.
Because anecdotally, a lot of women say squirting happens during G-spot stimulation.
There's definitely a connection there, but even the existence of the G-spot itself is a bit of a mystery.
It's like a riddle wrapped in an enigma.
Exactly. Some researchers believe it's a distinct area.
Others think it's just part of the clitoral network.
More research is definitely needed.
So we've got this mysterious fluid and a maybe mythical pleasure center. This is like an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, but for our bodies.
I like that analogy. It really captures the intrigue.
And that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating, right?
Absolutely. We're still learning so much about female sexual response, and squirting is a prime example of that.
Okay, so we've talked about what it might be, but now I have to know, what does it actually feel like to squirt?
Because Hollywood always makes it seem a bit, well, over the top.
Seriously, it's like a fire hydrant in those movies.
Let's just say reality is usually a bit more subtle.
Thank goodness for that.
In reality, the experience varies a lot from person to person.
Some women describe it as an intense orgasm, some as a release of pressure, others as a feeling of warmth.
There's a whole spectrum of experiences.
The Medical News Today article even mentions some women feeling empowered by squirting, which I found really interesting.
It's definitely a part of female sexuality that can challenge those traditional and often limiting views.
For some women, it's a way to embrace a more powerful expression of their sexuality.
Which is fantastic. It's all about owning your experience.
But of course, not every woman who squirts feels that way.
Of course not, and that's perfectly valid too.
For some, it might be a neutral experience.
And for others, it might be something they feel self-conscious about.
There's really no one right way to feel about it.
Exactly. It's about what feels right for you.
Okay, so let's get this straight. Squirting is not just peeing during sex.
No, it's definitely not that simple.
Even though the fluid might contain some urine,
It's not just a case of losing bladder control.
the fact that other fluids and glands might be involved
Yeah.
suggests it's a different physiological process altogether.
A process we're still unraveling, I might add. It's a process that, unfortunately, is often misunderstood.
Especially when you look at how it's portrayed in movies and TV shows.
Oh, absolutely. It's like they've all decided squirting has to be this massive, dramatic gusher.
Right. Talk about setting some unrealistic expectations.
It's often presented as this almost magical ability, like only certain women can do it.
which I think can make some women feel insecure if it's not happening for them.
Exactly. It's like this weird pressure to perform.
I'll admit, I've definitely had moments of wondering, am I doing something wrong?
Yeah.
Why doesn't that happen to me?
I think a lot of women have felt that way.
It's almost like squirting has become this measure of like sexual prowess or something.
Which is so unfortunate because it takes the focus away from what really matters.
It's a,
Individual pleasure, what feels good for you.
absolutely, that's what it should be about.
Media portrayals often miss the nuance of the experience.
The diversity of how women actually experience squirting, if they experience it at all.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
So how do we move away from those harmful stereotypes?
How do we get to a more realistic and empowering understanding of squirting?
Well, I think honest conversations like this are a great start.
I agree. Just talking about it openly, acknowledging the unknowns.
Debunking the myths and celebrating the range of experiences.
All of that helps shift the narrative.
And maybe encourages more research too.
Oh, absolutely. More research is crucial.
Because it's kind of mind-blowing that in 2024, there's still so much we don't know about female sexual response.
You would think we'd have it all figured out by now, but that's clearly not the case.
So if our listener is curious about squirting, what are the key takeaways from our deep dive so far?
Well, first and foremost, know that squirting is a natural bodily function.
There's nothing abnormal or embarrassing about it, whether you experience it or not.
Exactly. And if you are curious to explore it, communication is key.
Talk to your partner, be open to experimentation, and most importantly,
focus on what feels good for you.
Exactly. And don't get discouraged if it doesn't happen right away.
Remember, everybody is different.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach to sexual pleasure.
It's all about finding what works for you and your body.
Okay, before we wrap up this whole squirting saga, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier.
What's that?
How squirting can actually be a source of sexual empowerment for some women.
Yes, the 2021 study we mentioned really dug into that aspect.
Those researchers found that some women who squirted described it as a sexual superpower.
A way to really own their sexuality.
And challenge societal expectations.
I love that, flipping the script on the idea that female sexuality should be passive or subdued.
And it highlights how squirting can be a way for women to explore their bodies.
And their desires.
In a way that feels liberating and affirming.
Exactly.
Of course, not every woman who squirts will feel that way, and that's totally fine.
Absolutely. There's no pressure to feel a certain way about it.
But it's exciting to think about how this experience can be a catalyst for self-discovery.
And sexual empowerment.
It's all about finding what works for you.
And embracing the unique way your body responds to pleasure.
I think that's a perfect note to end on for this part of our deep dive. So as we wrap up our squirting deep dive, what are your final thoughts?
It's amazing how squirting really makes us rethink how we look at female sexuality.
It really does.
But it's like a big reminder that we still have so much to learn.
And that's pretty exciting.
It is. Think about it. We're on the edge of understanding women's bodies in a whole new way.
Especially how they experience pleasure.
Exactly. Just imagine what we could achieve if we really put more effort into researching and educating people about women's sexual health.
I mean, it could change so many women's lives.
Absolutely.
I know we've covered a lot today, and some of our listeners might be feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
So let's break it down one last time.
Sounds good.
First things first, squirting is totally natural.
It's not just pee, it's way more complex than that.
It involves all these different fluids and glands.
And how a woman experiences it, well, that can be totally different from one person to the next.
Some women love it, some don't really care, and some might feel a bit embarrassed about it.
It's all good. There's no right or wrong way to feel about it.
And if you're curious about exploring it,
talk to your partner.
Experiment.
And most importantly, focus on what feels good for you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We've definitely learned a lot today, but I think the biggest takeaway for me is this. When it comes to skirting, there's no shame, no judgment.
It's just one more piece of the amazing puzzle that is female sexuality.
And hey, sometimes a little mystery keeps things interesting, right?
Absolutely.
So let's embrace what we don't know, keep these conversations going, and remember, when it comes to our bodies, there's always something new to discover.
Always.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the wonderfully weird and wild world of squirting. We'll catch you next time.